Module A8, Special Senses. We have 5 special senses. Olfaction is a special sense of smell. Gustation is taste. Vision, equilibrium is balance. And then lastly, hearing. In Objective 1, we're going to look at the sensory organs of smell. We're going to trace their path, that pathway back to the brain for processing. And then we're also going to look at the physiological basis behind olfactory discrimination, or how we can discern all the different types of smells that we detect. The olfactory organs are located primarily in the upper nasal cavity. We start with cranial nerve number 1, olfactory nerve, as it runs anteriorly. It terminates in the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb will send fibers down through the perforated cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone and into the upper nasal cavity. Here we have 2 layers of tissue. We have the olfactory epithelium, and we also have a layer of lamina propria. The lamina propria is a connective tissue composed mainly of areolar tissue. In the lamina propria, we would also find, or expect to find, blood vessels, nerves, as well as olfactory gland. And the olfactory gland, or Bowman gland, its main function, or its function, is to produce a mucus, which then runs out and coats the external surfaces of these tissues. The olfactory epithelium contains a number of different types of cells. We have the olfactory receptors. These are modified neurons. We have supporting cells. These are epithelial. And here we would find our supporting cells. And then lastly, we have basal stem cells. These basal stem cells, when needed, they will differentiate and replace the olfactory receptors. These receptors, these specialized neurons, are one of the few neurons in the nervous system that actually are replaced. We've already mentioned that the olfactory glands, they secrete a mucoid or a mucus that coats the surfaces of the olfactory organs. And we've mentioned that the olfactory receptors are highly modified neurons. In terms of reception, we find that dissolved chemicals bind to membrane receptors on the surface of these olfactory receptors. They bind, and that initiates the process. And we'll talk more about that later. But just again, to give us a sense of that, as we inhale a tremendous amount of air. With that air, you're going to have various odorants, various molecules that the body can detect. They're known as odorants. Let me write that down. Odorants. And when these odorants bind when they bind the olfactory receptors, it triggers a depolarization. And if that depolarization is strong enough, it leads to an action potential, which is then sent to the brain for processing. "20 or more axons bundle together and leave the epithelium through the cribriform plate, and they synapse within the olfactory bulb. This is the first synapse. The axons that leave the olfactory bulb will then travel via the olfactory tract to various regions of the olfactory cortex, the hypothalamus, and portions of the limbic system. Remember, the limbic system is the emotion-based system, And as we mentioned when we talked about the limbic system, it's intimately tied with olfaction. Smelling a certain perfume from someone from your past can trigger back memories and emotions. This is the connection between the limbic system and the olfactory system. We can distinguish roughly between 2,000 and 4,000 different smells. And the central nervous system's job is to interpret those smells. The way that it determines various smells is by the pattern and frequency of receptor activity. We're going to see that this statement is a reoccurring statement as we move through the special senses. So let me try to break it down now. I try to use the analogy of the alphabet. We know that the alphabet contains 26 characters, and various patterns and frequencies of those characters produce an entire dictionary full of terms. We can get thousands and thousands of words from those 26 characters based on the pattern and the frequency of letters. And this is very similar to how the central nervous system interprets olfaction. It is the pattern and the frequency of the action potentials that are being sent back from particular receptors that allow the central nervous system to differentiate between smells.